Fox News alert, Flynn is out. President Trump will have to find a new national security advisor following last night's stunning resignation of Michael Flynn. The retired lieutenant general stepping down after reports that he misled White House officials about his contacts with Russia. This is Outnumbered. I'm Sandra Smith. Here today, Harris Faulkner in pink for Valentine's Day. Meghan McCain, a couch first-timer, is here. Fox News contributor and former deputy press secretary for the State Department, Marie Harf, is here, and we welcome her. And, of course, today's hashtag.
They jumped the gun on
One
me.
lucky guy, the co-host of
Happy
After the Bell on
Valentine's
Fox Business and host of Forbes on Fox,
Thank
David
you.
Asman, and
Thank
he
you.
is Outnumbered.
Thank you.
Good to have you, David, and
Great
good to have
be
you
here
for the
again.
first time, Marie.
Happy to be here. A lot of news.
A lot.
And you brought some sparkle pink for Valentine's Day.
Had to do
Girl
something.
after my own heart. I love them.
All right, well, so much going on. Let's get right to it. President Trump's national security advisor, Michael Flynn, resigning last night after apologizing to President Trump and Vice President Mike Pence for misleading them and other White House officials on his calls with Russia's ambassador to the U.S. The vice president, after being briefed by Flynn, had said in television interviews that Flynn did not discuss sanctions with the ambassador. Flynn later admitting the issue may have come up. Earlier on Fox and Friends, counselor to the president, Kellyanne Conway, on why Flynn's situation became untenable.
He was having any number of calls, and that in the end he felt he had misled or misrepresented all the facts to the president and to the vice president, and for that he was enormously and deeply sorry. And that really was the linchpin here, is that he either forgot, couldn't fully recall, or outwardly misled the vice president and others when he was characterizing a conversation he had had with the Russian ambassador. And I think that the situation became increasingly unsustainable, and he decided to resign.
Meantime, House Democrats demanding a probe into reports that the White House was warned last month that Flynn had lied about the extent of his conversations with the Russian envoy and was potentially vulnerable to Russian blackmail. Here's Democratic Senator Bob Casey.
It's not a good time for our country when this is happening, because you have a national security advisor who is resigning in the most adverse and difficult of circumstances. Unfortunately for the country, it's not over, because we've got to have some kind of investigation to find out not only what happened with General Flynn, but what the White House knew when they knew.
Chief White House correspondent John Roberts joins us live from the North Lawn of the White House. John Roberts, you've been reporting on this all night. Almost at midnight last night, you sent out everyone involved reportedly feels very badly about what happened. Where do we stand now?
Well, the White House, Sandra, would like for this to be all over with and move on to the next phase, but it looks like this is far from over, because as you saw there with Bob Casey, the Democrats don't want to let this go. They don't just want the head of Mike Flynn. They want to know what was the substance, what was the context of the telephone conversations that he was having with the Russian ambassador, Sergei Kislyak. Now, the White House would like for this all to just be about, no, it wasn't the content of the telephone conversations. That wasn't the problem. The big problem was that the national security advisor misled the vice president when he said he didn't talk about sanctions or didn't remember having a conversation about sanctions. And then the vice president went out there and reiterated that on national television. And don't forget, as you pointed out, the Department of Justice warned the White House last month that there was potentially damaging information in the transcripts of these telephone calls, things that the Russians could use against Flynn and potentially against the White House. The Speaker of the House, Paul Ryan, this morning said that the White House was right to get rid of Flynn. Listen to what he said.
National security is perhaps the most important function or responsibility a president has. And I think the president made the right decision to ask for his resignation. You cannot have a national security advisor misleading the vice president and others.
So what the White House would like to do now is focus on potential replacements for Flynn. On the left, you've got Vice Admiral Robert Harward. He was the deputy commander at CENTCOM, a Navy SEAL. He was also the honor man during BUD/S training. And what the honor man is it's the Navy SEAL candidate who is so inspiring that person inspires all the other Navy SEALs who were in the team to pull together and make it through when they wouldn't think that they could. So the White House is portraying him really as an inspirational character to be the national security advisor. General David Petraeus also in the mix, as well as Lieutenant General Keith Kellogg, who is currently acting as the national security advisor. So they'd like to get somebody in place, Sandra, by the end of this week. Don't know if they'll be able to do that, but the Democrats are going to continue to try to knock them off balance Watch for that in the hours and days ahead.
All right, John Roberts, thank you for all your reporting on this, and we'll come back to you as you have news. That being said, Maria, I actually want to start out with you. This is something you are so familiar with, the ins and outs of communication and the transmission of information as you have it. And as Kellyanne Conway put it, the linchpin here is that Flynn either forgot, couldn't fully recall, or outwardly misled the vice president and others. That's going to be decided in days to come. Certainly, Democrats see it one way right now. Republicans in the White House want to put out another way.
I think that's right. And look, Flynn had to go. Based on what Kellyanne said, any of those options are bad ones. But broader than that, I think, is the question of this administration's relationship with Russia. The content of that call does matter, I think. Either Flynn made this call going rogue or as part of a strategy that the incoming administration had to be closer with Russia. I think that's concerning. I think that matters. And so going forward, Flynn is out. That was right. But I do think we need to take a hard look at where this administration is going with Russia. Just look at the news today about the ship off the coast of Delaware.
Yeah. And of course,
this is serious stuff.
Key there is going to be the contestants, as you said, as John Roberts was pointing
right.
out, who might fill Michael Flynn's shoes. But David, going back to what Marie just said, it's the contents of the phone conversation or what the White House is putting out.
Right.
For them, it's more misleading the vice president and the president.
Well, I don't want to jump ahead of the human story first, because I think it's always important. There's always a human story in whatever happens. And I knew Flynn was gone yesterday when I interviewed Colonel Ralph Peters, who has known him for 35 years, said he's never seen a more brilliant military man than General Flynn. They were captains together in an intel program. But he began to question General Flynn when he took that money from RT, Russian television, back in 2015, between the time he left the Obama administration and the time he was nominated. He took money from a Russian organization has been very closely united with the Putin administration. He sat next to Putin at this dinner back in 2015. And Ralph Peters says, you just don't do that. What's extraordinary is how people that are so smart, this guy's been in intel his entire military career, could do things that stupid. He must have known that this conversation that he had with the Russian ambassador was being recorded. He knows intel.
And when you talk about the human element of it, Megan, a senior administration source revealed to John Roberts that President Trump was willing to hang in there with Flynn, but that Flynn cratered and took himself out, obviously, as we saw everything happen last night. But everybody feels bad about the situation. Your take?
It's really simple. I mean, if you lie to the vice president and he goes on TV and repeats that lie, you should be fired or you should step down. The interesting factor in this is there seems to be a complete and total breakdown of our national security apparatus. Who exactly is in charge right now? President Trump had gone on record saying that he didn't take the briefings because he talked to Michael Flynn every day. So if Michael Flynn isn't telling the president and vice president the truth, that in and of itself is a huge problem. As Marie pointed out earlier, this raises all new questions about the administration's relationship with Russia, the administration's relationship with Putin, and this is only going to get worse. When I was talking about political capital on this couch a few days ago, this is what I'm talking about. You only have so many chances for egregious errors. I think in the Obama administration, it was around 7 years before somebody resigned and stepped down. So this
but they had a honeymoon.
They did have
Trump
a
has
honeymoon.
never had.
True, but we knew this. We know going into this that there's a triple standard for Donald Trump and his administration. And when I woke up this morning, quite frankly, I was surprised because I thought from what I saw with Kellyanne Conway on TV, this administration would double down on Michael Flynn. I will say more than anything else, we do need to keep in mind this man gave 30 years of service to this country. We should thank him for that. And he's going to be vilified and railroaded all day. Maybe he should be, but let's not forget the service he did give.
Now, I want to say, though, because you bring up such an interesting issue, and before the show, Marie, you and I were talking about this, like who now is in charge of watching the shop? I realize that spy ship that you mentioned is 70 miles off the coast of Delaware, so they're still in international waters, and our borderline, if you will, that water borderline is 12 nautical miles out. So it's not a critical concern right now, but it is one that needs to be watched. Even the source on record has said that. So who's watching that specifically? The American people need to be told that today. I think that's worth probably something coming out. Maybe we'll see it in the White House briefing later today if and when that question comes up and that actually happens. But Sandra, you ask about the three people who are kind of on the short list now for the job. I just want to point out a couple things that kind of hit me. So Vice Admiral Bob Harwood is one former Navy SEAL. He has a relationship already with the Secretary of Defense, James Mattis. So that kind of gives him at least a little woven fabric within. But I thought this was interesting. Lieutenant General Joseph Kellogg is the acting person right now. You always say that possession is 9 9/10 of the law. So how much more can we learn about this man?
Right, and the third person is General David Petraeus, of course, that is being discussed. But going back to Harvard, which has been being seen as one of the top picks here, David, White House sources tell John Roberts he's described as the toughest guy in the SEALs, a real rock, no games.
I think both Megan and I can talk about this. It was a SEAL, by the way, that got my son into the Marine Corps, so I'm always thankful to the SEAL. Semper Fi. It's a terrific thing. I just want to, if I can, go back to something that Megan was saying, which is the Democrats have not allowed this particular administration to have a government yet. It's really not a complete government. The continual harping on all the details of all the nominees, some of which are fair, but some of which are not fair, clearly just meant to obstruct, is really holding up the construction of a government that would allow us as citizens the security that we need. We have to focus on that for the moment.
All right, Marie, what do you think about these potential candidates to replace Flynn?
Well, I worked for General Petraeus, actually, when he was at CIA. For a very short period of time, I was his spokesperson. I think he's the perfect person for the job. I think you need someone who is strategic, who will come in there and say, we're going to bring the government together. Here's what we want to do in foreign policy. Here's how we're going to get it done. Who can really look at the entire world and set a focus for this administration that is in complete chaos.
But you don't think Senator Schumer and other Democrats will harp on what he did in terms of his problems with secrets in the past?
I think, look, there's not a ton of options that I would endorse as being good ones for this position. I know General Petraeus a little bit, and I think in this job, actually, he could set a strategic tone for an administration that has been completely lacking one.
And he's widely respected by the American public and the military.
We know the president had looked at him briefly for Secretary of State, so you know he's somebody that he wants in his inner circle, potentially.
All right. Well, we will have much more on General Michael Flynn coming up, as Republicans are asking why information about him was leaked to the media, whether it's all part of a coordinated attack on the Trump administration. Plus, President Trump praising the detention of nearly 700 illegals last week. But critics call them disturbing. Who's right and what to expect going forward. And after the show, of course, you can join our live chat by clicking the Overtime tab at foxnews.com/outnumbered or go to facebook.com/outnumberedfnc. And of course, you can tweet us during the show. We're looking at those tweets. Make us laugh. Send us questions. Marie's here. Dave's here. We'll see you after the break.
President Trump is praising a slew of immigration raids. U.S. authorities say last week they arrested 680 people in Los Angeles, Chicago, Atlanta, San Antonio, and New York City. The president says the raids are part of an effort to keep his campaign promise.
We're actually taking people that are criminals, very, very hardened criminals in some cases, with a tremendous track record of abuse and problems, and we're getting them out. And that's what I said I would do. I'm just doing what I said I would do when we won by a very, very large electoral college vote.
The Department of Homeland Security says 75% of those detained committed serious crimes, including murder, aggravated sexual abuse, and drug trafficking. But Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer calls the raids deeply disturbing, in his words, saying in a statement, quote, "I am troubled by the lack of transparency and potential due process violations surrounding ICE's most recent enforcement actions. That is why I'm calling on ICE to release information about the location of the raids and details of the people who were arrested," end quote. David, we saw some of this type of raid progression under President Obama. Are there significant differences that we need to know about?
I'm smiling, not because raids are a happy thing. They're not at all. But why wasn't Chuck Schumer so troubled by the 3 million deportations of President Obama? That's 1 million more than G.W. Bush had, by the way, during the course of his administration. That averages out to 1,000 deportations a week during President Obama's entire term. So far, he is way ahead of President Obama was way ahead of the deportations of our current president. So the point is, there's not a lot different. There's a lot of fake news out there, and I use that phrase in a very guarded term, not as often as President Trump does. But this is fake news, the idea that there's something fundamentally different about what's going on. If anything, it's certainly less in quantity and probably less in quality, too, in terms of the severity of the raids.
Part of what Senator Schumer is pointing to, though, is the due process, which is kind of folding into the whole immigration pause and so on and so forth. So there potentially could be a little bit of politics there. But, Marie, what do you think?
I don't think there's a harm in getting more information. And sure, you can say Chuck Schumer's playing politics fine. We live in a political world. There's nothing wrong when you are kicking people out of the country. And we've seen some of the photos of, they're not all like this, but there have been some mothers taken from their families. Most of them are criminals. I'm not disagreeing with that. There's no harm in more information, certainly. I think that Chuck Schumer and others should be right to push for that. And so I think that what this just shows us is in the long term, we actually do need comprehensive
immigration reform. As long as it doesn't
reform.
compromise a criminal case in the future. I mean, that's one of the considerations you have to make.
Of course it is, but I think that given what President Trump said on the campaign trail and since he took office, his words have consequences, they matter. He said some pretty aggressive things, and now it is worth asking questions when some families are being separated by this policy. I don't think that's too much to ask.
And so what is the best way to go about that, though, and then continue what you have going on?
Well, I don't know the specifics of what Senator Schumer's asked for, but if there's a way for DHS or ICE to provide more information about what crimes these folks were convicted of, I haven't seen a lot of breakdown on that. To give some more information about what's driving these current raids, you know, you get one story from ICE who says this is a continuation of Obama. You get another story from President Trump who says this is my policy. Which is it?
That's a good point.
So there is some confusion, I think.
Megan?
I just think it's Trump fulfilling his campaign promises. He ran hard on immigration. First thing he promised, coming down the golden escalator of Trump Tower. He's just doing what he said he was going to do. We can debate all day long on this couch about comprehensive immigration reform, and God knows I have done it for years. That is not what the American public responded to. It is not what the American public wants. Nuanced discussion about immigration is not what the American public wants. They want people who have committed hard felonies, and especially when we have discussions about sanctuary cities and illegal aliens coming here and committing heinous crimes, even murdering people in sanctuary cities. They want them out, and they want them out now. And it's this breakdown of our borders that has happened for the past 8 years, and I would even debate the last 12.
Well, and to go back to your point, Marie, Homeland Security Secretary John Kelly said these raids were fulfilling a campaign promise, but emphasized that the operations were routine. But I think part of the problem is you look at a leading Democrat like Chuck Schumer, and it's hard to decipher what Democrats are upset about and what they really have a problem with right now, because they're taking issue with just about everything in the first 3 weeks of this administration.
I think it's bigger than that. Look, I think the American people do want, if you're a criminal, if you've murdered someone, if you've raped someone, I think the American people agree that those people should get deported. I don't think there's disagreement on that.
But I think the American public also agrees that if you come here legally, there are people, our own First Lady waited 10 years to become a citizen. There are people that go through the proper channels. There are people that go to war and serve and become citizens abroad, serving in a war.
Excuse me, that happened to my stepson.
Happened to your stepson.
My stepson was not a citizen when he joined the Marine Corps. He became a citizen in Iraq.
But so why should someone else who's breaking the law and committing crimes be in front of your stepson?
But I think the question is, the reality is there are women like this one woman we saw in California who's been here for 20 years, something like that. She has 2 kids who are American citizens. She's checked in with ICE every month for the last 8 years, 12 years, however many years she's been here. For the first time she did that, she got taken from her family. I'm not sure that the American people want to take mothers from their children.
And that's where you say the transparency needs
to come
the question. Particularly on a case like that. All right, we'll move on. National Security Advisor Michael Flynn's resignation is now sparking concerns about the leaks coming out of Washington, D.C., whether they are all part of a coordinated attack on the Trump administration and what can be done about the leaking. And Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is in Washington on a visit which could reshape the United States relationship with Israel, which you know has been pretty chippy as of late under the Obama administration. What's at stake?
Fox News alert. We are awaiting reaction from Democratic leadership to the resignation of National Security Advisor Michael Flynn. This is House Republicans want to know why information that revealed Flynn's actions were leaked to the media. They're asking the FBI to do an assessment amid concerns the leaks are a part of a coordinated effort to attack the Trump administration. Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge is live from Washington. Catherine?
Well, thank you, Megan. Writing in a tweet this morning, President Trump said the focus should be on national security, not the politics of whether his advisor stays or goes. The real story here, he wrote, is why are there so many illegal leaks coming out of Washington? Will these leaks be happening as I deal with North Korea, etc.? The Republican leadership of the House Intelligence Committee wants the FBI to do an assessment of recent media leaks that have revealed details of sensitive discussions and collection methods involving key Trump administration officials. The release of information from the Flynn phone calls with the Russian ambassador are especially problematic. When the intelligence community captures phone calls of an American inside the U.S., even if the conversation is with a foreign national, such as an ambassador, steps must be taken to shield the American caller's identity. Unmasking the caller, in this case Flynn, needs sign-off at the highest levels.
If it was picked up inadvertently, then that would have had to have been approved by someone in the last administration to actually unmask his name so that the FBI or intelligence officials knew who it was on the other end of the phone talking to the Russian ambassador. If in fact the press reports are right, someone made the decision to deliberately listen to General Flynn's phone calls, and that is, I think, unprecedented, unwarranted, and flat out wrong.
Meantime, senior House Democrats John Conyers and Elijah Cummings from the Judiciary and Government Oversight Committees want a full and immediate briefing on the Flynn phone calls before the end of this week when the House goes on recess. Megan.
Thank you so much, Catherine.
You're welcome.
We're going to go to you first, David. So I was accused of being paranoid, and I believe Nixonian was the word Kennedy used, for saying that this White House has a leaking problem and it's undermining this administration, and it's going to turn into an even bigger problem. And I think today the proof is in the pudding.
Well, there was this sort of in-between world that we had from December 29th, which was when the sanctions were announced by the Obama administration, till now, when Sally Yates was in charge of the Justice Department. Sally Yates was the acting Justice Department head. I happen to think she may be the one who found out about this first. She certainly seemed to be the one that was conveying information about this to the Trump administration. But that's when they decided to put the bug on the Russian ambassador to figure out why it was that the Russians weren't reacting to the sanctions with more vehemence. Because remember, they were very calm after the sanctions were put on. A lot of people were asking why it is that they're so calm. Well, they put this bug on the Russian ambassador's phone. Then they heard this conversation from Flynn. Somebody had to give permission to that. I think it might have been Sally Yates, the Justice Department, but Maria has some different opinions.
I think the people that are in charge of giving that permission tend to come from the intelligence community. The NSA director, the director of national intelligence, that tends to go up through intelligence channels, not
even though it was the
channels.
FBI that put the leak on the ambassador's phone.
When you're tapping a foreign official and you pick up an American citizen, at least from my experience, that's my understanding, that it would be an intelligence official who says there's a reason to do this. And let's keep in mind, this could be part of the ongoing investigation that we know through, again, leaks, is ongoing into the Trump campaign and Trump administration's ties to the Russian government. So it could be part of an investigation.
You brought up a really fascinating point with me earlier, Marie, about just the impetus for General Flynn to have not perhaps been as open as he could have been, or flat out lied. We don't know what happened there. But there might have been some reason other than it was just his own personal opinion to do that.
Right. I mean, why do we lie about things? Because we don't think we're okay. It's not something we've done is not okay, right? If he was comfortable with the content of the conversation, why would he feel the need to lie to the vice president about it? So either he had the conversation in a way that was rogue, he wasn't instructed by someone on the president-elect's team to do it, or it was part of a strategy to try and improve relations with Russia, which President Trump has said he wants to do. Both are concerning to me, and that's why not focusing on the fact that he resigned, but on the fact that we need to get to the bottom of what happened here.
By the way,
is important to the American people.
Aren't you shocked that he wouldn't realize that his conversation was being tapped? This is the former head of the DIA, Defense Intelligence Agency, very important next to the CIA, the most important intel agency around.
And I actually would, and I don't know this, I'm guessing that Ambassador Kislyak was not just being monitored starting then. That Russian officials.
They always.
So I feel like this is almost turning into an interview of you, Marie, because this is your expertise. So I want to shoot another question your way. When you go back to what the president tweeted out just a couple hours ago, earlier today from his account, he said, "Why are there so many?" This is clearly where he wants the focus. Why are there so many illegal leaks coming out of Washington? Will these leaks be happening as ideal on North Korea, etc.? So he wants the focus to be there. If this had happened during the Obama administration, what would Democrats be asking to do about this?
Well, first, he should be concerned about leaks on North Korea when he has sensitive conversations in the middle of his club with waiters and a lot of other uncleared people around. So it's a little disingenuous for him to say that about North Korea. We had leaks in the Obama administration. Every administration does. Unfortunately, with technology, I think it's even easier today to get information out. I am concerned as a former CIA officer about sources and methods, about losing the ability to tap foreign officials when it leaks. But I also think we can't forget that the reason a lot of these are career people probably leaking, not just political. They are doing this because they are so concerned about how erratically this administration is behaving on foreign policy. They're concerned about the ties to Russia. They think the Russians aren't in our national
Megan
security
seems like she's got an immediate response to that.
No disrespect, but it's a little naive to think this isn't political as well. And a lot of these
it can
people
be both,
aren't trying to undermine this administration. I mean, he has a historically contentious relationship with all facets of the intelligence community. So yes, I assume there are people that are concerned. I am concerned. What General Flynn did is a fireable offense. You lie to the vice president, let him go on TV and lie, fine, you're fired. But beyond that, let's not pretend they're also not trying to undermine the Trump administration.
By the way, this is the brass ring not only in politics but also in the media. The media thinks that this is the thing that will sink the Trump administration too, so they're on it as well.
All right, 100%. So this is interesting because we know how rocky the relationship was with President Obama and Israel, the prime minister there. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is now in Washington, D.C. He's on a trip which could reshape the future of the U.S.-Israeli alliance. Ahead of what's expected to be a crucial meeting at the White House tomorrow, Netanyahu will sit down with Secretary of State Rex Tillerson later today. And just before leaving Tel Aviv, the Israeli leader was striking an optimistic tone about his meeting with President Trump, despite the White House's recent pushback on Israel's settlement expansion. Watch.
The alliance between Israel and America has always been extremely strong. It's about to get even stronger. President Trump and I see eye to eye on the dangers emanating from the region, but also on the opportunities. And we'll talk about both, as well as upgrading the relations between Israel and the United States in many, many fields.
Another immediate concern for the two leaders is Iran, which the U.S. just slapped with sanctions after Iran's latest ballistic missile test. And we know that that's not the only country that's been flexing its ballistic muscles recently either.
That's right. But Iran, for the Israelis, I think the Iranian deal for the Israelis was the last straw in their relationship with the Obama administration. And I think there will be pushback on settlements and other issues, but I don't think the Israeli government, particularly Netanyahu, has ever been happier with a U.S. leader than he is with Donald Trump.
All right. I'm going to break in with some breaking news right now. So we've been talking about the politics, the logistics of the departure of the National Security Advisor, General Flynn, right? And now the House Democrats are responding. Let's watch together.
Flynn had lied about his discussions with the Russian ambassador. It is inconceivable to me that the White House counsel would have kept that to himself. So others in the administration were aware that the National Security Advisor of the United States had misled other administration officials who had in turn misled the American people. And they were okay with that. The administration was okay with the fact the American people were laboring under the falsehood that they had not discussed the sanctions with the Russians. The resignation of Michael Flynn was brought about not by discovering the falsehood, but by the fact that the falsehood became public. And that ought to be deeply disturbing to everyone, that the White House would have even contemplated tolerating a national security advisor who would lie to them and to the American people through the vice president. This obviously begs a lot of questions about whether those conversations between Flynn and the Russian ambassador were sanctioned by the president himself or others in the administration, whether they were knowing of those conversations, and why those who were knowing did nothing to correct the record when the American people were told otherwise. All of this merits investigation. That investigation, I believe, ought to be done in part through the Intelligence Committee as part of the investigation we're doing now. And I was very disappointed to see the Speaker today unwilling to commit to investigate these communications between Flynn and the Russian ambassador. My feeling is that if the Speaker is not willing to commit to this, he ought to allow the formation of an independent commission and get out of the way, because these questions are far too important to go unanswered. I'm also want to say that I'm pleased to see at least some Republicans stepping forward today to call on the president to speak directly about whether he authorized these communications between Flynn and the ambassador, whether he was aware of these. The president, I think, owes the American people an explanation, and he ought to do that directly and not through dissembling aides. And with that, let me introduce Elijah Cummings, the ranking member on the Government Reform Committee.
Thank you. Let me begin by asking everyone in this room a very simple question. Do you hear that? Do you hear the silence? This is the sound of House Republicans conducting no oversight of President Trump. Zero. That is what it sounds like when they abdicate their duty under the Constitution. We've been asking for months for basic oversight of the president and his advisors and their ties to Russia. But our chairman, Jason Chaffetz, has not lifted one finger. He has not requested a single solitary piece of paper. And think about where we are right now. General Flynn flew to Moscow to have a lavish dinner with President Putin and celebrate the Kremlin-backed media outlet RT. According to our own U.S. intelligence officials, RT is, and I quote, the Kremlin's principal international propaganda outlet, unquote. Flynn now admits that he got paid for that trip, but he refuses to say how much he was paid. He may have violated the Constitution in the process. As a retired officer, he may not, except for foreign emoluments. The Pentagon is investigating this, and we may hear back from them this week. Flynn was secretly communicating with Russian officials at the same time Russia was attacking our democracy. Let me say that again. Flynn was secretly communicating with Russian officials at the same time that Russia was attacking our democracy. Flynn may have violated the Logan Act by discussing the sanctions imposed by the United States in response to Russia's attacks. We have no idea why Flynn was doing all of this and why he was trying desperately to help Russia. And I know he's now resigned, but he's not going to get off that easy. We need some answers to a whole lot of questions. But the obvious questions are, what did the president know and when did he know it? Was the president aware of Flynn's efforts? Did he support them? Last night, we learned that the Justice Department warned the White House counsel 3 weeks ago that Flynn secretly talked with the Russians about sanctions and may have lied about it to the vice president. The department warned that the national security advisor was at risk of being blackmailed by the Russian government. And that was 3 weeks ago. 3 long weeks ago, 21 days ago. So why did the president say on Friday he did not know anything about Flynn's calls with the Russian ambassador? Did the White House counsel really never tell the president? Because if that's true, if that is true, I cannot see how the White House counsel could stay in his position. That would be a major national security breach not to inform the president of such a serious charge. Another question. Why did Flynn continue to sit in on the most sensitive classified meetings until just 2 days ago? Ladies and gentlemen, something is wrong with that picture. Who at the White House? And I want the press to press these questions. Who at the White House decided to do nothing for 3 weeks as Flynn sat in on meeting after meeting after meeting? Did the president decide to wait? Did counsel decide to wait? Something is wrong here. Madam Leader, just this morning, Flynn tweeted, and this is a quote, "Scapegoat," end of quote. Scapegoat. He basically described himself as a scapegoat. And so I believe we need to hold a public hearing with Flynn to get to the bottom of this. Our committee held 3 or 4 hearings, emergency hearings on Hillary Clinton in a matter of a week or two. And if there was any emergency at this moment in the history of this country, this is the moment. And so we need to get his security and clearance documents. I want to see them. I want to see what he put in those documents to find out if he was honest on those forms. And we need to know how much he got paid to have dinner with Putin. But that is only the beginning. The press has asked us over and over again. I know they've asked Mr. Schiff and asked the leader, does it end here? Shouldn't things end here? No, they cannot end here. Ladies and gentlemen, we are in a fight for the soul of our democracy. The question is whether we will clearly understand that this is our watch. And let's be clear. Schiff said it quite eloquently. The Republicans need to join us. This is not a Democratic issue. This is not a Republican issue. It's not an independent issue. This is an American issue for the soul of our democracy. Now it gives me great pleasure to introduce the chairman, the ranking member of the Judiciary Committee, Mr. Conyers.
Unless we want to yield to the leader.
Oh, I'm sorry, leader.
Okay, all right.
Our ranking member.
Thank you so much. The overdue resignation of General Flynn last evening does not resolve this matter. I want to make that clear because I've been trying to get my chairman of the Judiciary Committee to hold a hearing immediately today, certainly not later than tomorrow. What did President Trump knew, and when did he know it? What did Vladimir Putin know, and when did he knew it? How is it possible that the White House counsel knew this for about 3 whole weeks and did nothing? Now, the American people deserve answers, and they're not receiving them from either the Trump administration or from the Republican Congress. So we will do everything within our power to continue to get to the bottom of this very serious breach in trust and security. We have not heard back from our leadership today, and we've called repeatedly to Chairman Goodlatte about this matter. Now, why is it that the Flynn resignation does not resolve this matter? We need to know and to find out who authorized Flynn to speak to the Russians. We need to know why he lied to the administration and the American people, and why the White House counsel's office sat on this information for 3 weeks. Now, it would surprise me to find out that Flynn was acting on his own. He seems to speak to the President of the United States almost every day. And so we want everyone to know that this is just the beginning of an inquiry, that we're not making accusations. We're just trying to find answers to these very vexing problems. Thank you. Mr. Thompson.
So we've been watching leadership in the House on the Democrat side respond to the resignation today of the National Security Advisor, General Flynn. And of course, there were politics dripping there, as there normally are. I mean, at one point, one of the leaders said the public we want to hold public hearings, rather, and that was Elijah Cummings, Congressman Cummings. We want to hold public hearings with Flynn, just like the Republicans held hearings with Hillary Clinton. So I'm confused as to where we are, Marie. Make it make sense.
Look, I am not going to compare it to anything that the Republicans did in the last 8 years.
He did.
Well, I'm not going to. What I would say is that just having this conversation here on the couch today, there are a lot of unanswered questions. This is bigger than Mike Flynn having to step down. I know the White House wants it to be that story. The story is, what contacts have the Trump campaign and administration had with the Russians? And what does that say about where this administration is going? So whether that's congressional hearings, which, look, the American people also have questions and have a right to know whether this was part of a strategy, whether this was Flynn acting alone. I don't think that's out of bounds.
So how, you know what, you said something while we were watching. Well, you said many things while we were watching. One of the things you said, because we were talking about the messaging coming out of Republicans and the optics of them getting ahead of the story. How are Republicans doing on this issue, and what do you expect us to see next?
I'm going to do something that is supposed to be verboten in television. I want to defer my answer to the lady on my left, because as anxious as I was to say something when that was going on, she was very
from Arizona.
They said the Democrats said there were no Republicans who've spoken about the connection between the Russians and the Trump administration. You beg to differ.
Well, I feel like there are three very big, well-known Republicans who are taking a lot of heat from other Republicans for being so aggressive about Putin and this administration's relationship, which we're still not clear on, relationship with Vladimir Putin and Russia. We were talking about this during the break. I laughed out loud when he said that, because again, you cannot paint all Republicans with one single brush. There are a lot of foreign policy hawks that are very concerned about our relationship with Russia. So trying to politicize it, it's just not going to work on the Democrats' part. Also, just going forward, I laugh at the idea that Democrats have ever cared about anything Vladimir Putin or Russia has done in the past 8 years. The strength Putin has right now, the annexing of Crimea, the Syrian refugee crisis. Obama didn't do anything. In fact, he was caught on a mic saying he would have more flexibility after the election. So spare me that you now care about Russia now that it's politically expedient.
Well, and not to mention, Sandra, that when Barack Obama was going up against Mitt Romney, I mean, he pretty much said, no, that's not the most important thing we're facing right now.
1980s foreign policy.
Right, but I mean, Mitt Romney clearly could see something.
I am just looking at I'm looking at Twitter because I always promise that we do for our viewers, and I'm looking at the string of tweets coming out from Democrats right now, and they're pouncing on this. Bernie Sanders has been very active during this whole thing, and I was trying to get back to what he had said, and Harris just came to me too fast.
Oh no, but we can come back. You do that, and we'll come back, David.
No, but I mean, you were saying, Megan, while those Democrats were up there speaking, you were saying these were the wrong people to put this message out there. What did you mean by that?
Congressman Lewis didn't even show up to the inauguration, and he has, race baited his way through the past. Bush, my father, Romney, and now Donald Trump. So please, again, these are not the right people when you're coming out looking so politically inclined just from the gate.
Right.
I would put your foreign policy hawks on the Democratic side, people that actually care about national security and have historically, but it looks all political, and I think people on the right are going to tune out.
Well, I can tell you one thing. The White House press briefing is coming up any moment now. We're watching for that. And, this president has had so much transparency in terms of his ability to reach millions of people at once with a tweet. And we hear from the administration every day. So it will be really interesting, some of the questions that were just posed by the Democrats, where you go in the briefing room that you're looking at live on the left side of your screen when the press secretary Sean Spicer steps up in the short little while. We are on the story. Stay with us. Fox News alert, Democrats are still responding, and we're also waiting for the White House press briefing to get started, too. So we have two optics going on right now in terms of the departure of General Flynn from the National Security Advisor position today, his resignation.
Can I take my time that I gave to Megan?
Yeah, please take it. So my question for you is, how do Republicans take this moment forward?
Well, I think they do have to get ahead of it now, because what's clear from that presser that we just saw is that Democrats smell blood in the water, and it is very political right now. I mean, no question that there's more politics and national security involved.
Hearings,
who is the best communicator in the world right now, or at least the most direct? Donald Trump. Donald Trump has to come out and say something about all this. Clearly, we're about to hear a presser. Sean Spicer is going to do his best. I think we have to hear from Donald Trump and put the politics in its place.
And for people who say that this is much to do about nothing, put it into context.
Yeah, because it's pure. Democrats it's the brass ring for Democrats. This is their chance chance, they think, to get Donald Trump. And Donald Trump's got to speak out and make sure that doesn't happen.
All right, real quickly, though, Marie, you say that there are some unanswered questions.
There are. And I spent the last 8 years defending an administration, as Megan said, that was accused of being too soft on Russia, too close to them. And now Republicans have an obligation, particularly, to use that same standard for their own president, from their party.
We're going to come right back here, a spicy Outnumbered with a lot of breaking news. Stay close.
All right, a big day for news. We're waiting the White House reaction. The White House daily briefing will be taking place just moments from now following the resignation of General Michael Flynn. David Asman, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Marie Harf, also good to have you for the first time.
Perfect
on the
time for Marie.
Yeah. All right,
Thank you.
That news briefing will be starting in just moments from now. We're going to keep it right here for Overtime. Happening now starts right now.